questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, our thoughts are with the victims of the tragedy of the École Polytechnique, women who lost their lives simply because they were women. We remember their lives and the tragedy that this represented for their families. And we commit to ensuring that this will never happen again. Will the government please share its thoughts on this matter? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Sport. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. Obviously, all of us here today send our thoughts to the families of the victims, the 14 women who were murdered during the École Polytechnique tragedy. The government wants to do more to protect women, and that's why we have this very important bill to limit assault rifles. And so we invite all parliamentarians to work with us to strengthen this bill and better protect women. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The Auditor General today pointed to horrific waste. According to her, the government wasted at least $4.6 billion and another $27 billion, which she said were suspicious overpayments and should be investigated. There are 1,500 ineligible recipients. So why did the government waste money and create inflation on the backs of Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Revenue. Mr. Speaker, our government acted quickly to help Canadians during the pandemic, and we made the right choices. We would like to thank the Auditor General for her report and for her hard work, and we'd like to thank her for confirming that our COVID-19 benefits were targeted and effective. It is clearly indicated in the report that those benefits helped the economy get back on its feet, and Canadians know that we protected them, and we will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Is now exposed for having wasted massive sums over the last several years. According to the Auditor General, there is $4 billion of known waste, another $27 billion of suspected waste. There is $60 million of spending that's under criminal investigation. There were 190,000 people who quit their jobs and therefore were not eligible to receive the CERB benefit, but did anyway. They even sent the CERB to 1,500 prisoners, Mr. Speaker. Why did the government waste so much and make Canadians pay the price?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General found very clearly that CERB and our individual benefits achieved their intended goals of getting money to Canadians quickly, of allowing Canadians to stay home safely, and avoiding severe social and economic consequences. We as a Parliament approved an attestation-based approach. We knew from the beginning there would be post-payment verification. We are working methodically through that, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure all Canadians that we are on top of this.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, we already knew that the government paid billions of dollars in wage subsidies to profitable corporations that were able to pay out dividends to their wealthy executives. Now we know they also paid $15 billion to companies that did not have a significant revenue drop, and so they were able to pocket the cash at the expense of the Canadian people. Now, this is the same government that gave money to Loblaws, to other wealthy corporations, always at the expense of the working class. Why do they always take from the have-nots and give to the have-yachts?
L'Honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government made decisions that undoubtedly saved lives and the economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our agency has been working for months to check the eligibility of recipients, and the Auditor General concluded, what she concluded was in compliance is what the report said. The recovery will take years, and while the Conservatives are stuck with bad cryptocurrency advice from their leader, we are helping Canadians. Yes, but they're delivering for prisoners. The government gave CERB to 1,500 prisoners who were in prison after having committed crimes. So they clearly weren't eligible. 190,000 people received CERB who had left their jobs on purpose, and who therefore were not eligible. We're talking about $30 billion of wasted money. And we know that there are criminal investigations underway. Will the government finally investigate to recover the money that was lost on the backs of Canadians? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, in an article by the CBC, the member for Edmonton West said that recovery is a process that can take many years. So here's my question, Mr. Speaker. Does his own leader agree with that member? The honourable member for Belleuil Chambly. Mr. Speaker, this day, December 6th, marks the commemoration of the horrific femicide committed at École Polytechnique. This compassion should guide all of our work, especially with regard to gun control. The government tabled a very complex amendment to the point that the Prime Minister and the Minister say that it's an issue that needs to be dealt with by experts. Very quickly but rigorously, does the government agree to add 2 committee meetings so that experts can analyze this bill? Thank you. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we would like to thank the Bloc Québécois for their cooperation, and also the NDP, also their reasonable and responsible approach to working in concert to strengthen this bill in committee. It's very important that everyone work together on this file. It was mentioned today we've commemorated Polytechnique, and so we want to remove assault rifles from our streets and protect the rights of hunters and Indigenous people. We're working on that. The Prime Minister is committed to that, and I urge everyone to work together on this. The Honourable Member for Belleuil Chambly. Yes, that is the spirit of the question I've been asking. Obviously, I share the concern that recreational hunters might be the object of petty politics, but we're talking about a sense of security for civil society and the families of these victims. Clarity should be at the heart of this issue, and we are asking for 2 extra committee meetings with experts in order to analyze the amendment. Can that be done, please, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government is determined to work with all parliamentarians, with the Bloc, with the NDP, to ensure that this bill strikes the right balance and achieves the objectives that we set, that is to eliminate weapons, for example, that were used to kill people at Polytechnique and the Quebec Mosque, while protecting the rights of hunters and Indigenous people. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Had to be called into long-term care homes in this country. And now the Red Cross has been called into children's hospitals in Ottawa. It is clear that our healthcare system is in crisis, but the Prime Minister has been missing in action. Leadership isn't looking for excuses, it's showing up and finding solutions. So when will the Prime Minister show leadership, step up and declare or call for an emergency meeting of the First Ministers and solve the crisis in our healthcare system?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the honourable member. Urgent actions are indeed required to address the current health workforce crisis, and that's why we have taken significant steps forward by establishing a coalition for action for healthcare workers to inform immediate and long-term solutions to address these challenges, introducing measures to facilitate the entry of foreign national physicians and permanent residents, as well as announcing a national nursing officer to provide strategic advice from a nursing perspective. Our government's priority remains to work together for better outcomes for Canadians, and that includes the youngest patients in our hospitals. So I appreciate the attention to this very important matter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.
Member for Burnaby South.
Les médecins.
Physicians, nurses, healthcare workers are sharing horrific stories about what is happening right now in our healthcare system. We are in the midst of a crisis, Mr. Speaker, and it's clear children are getting sick and they have no access to health care. And this Prime Minister is not showing leadership. When is he going to show leadership and do what needs to be done to save our healthcare system? The Honourable Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Leader of the NDP for his very important question. We obviously share his concerns with regard to the difficulties our healthcare system is going through in Canada. He talked about difficulties in children's hospitals and the important issue of a shortage of healthcare professionals. That is exactly what we are discussing with healthcare ministers and provincial premiers. We are encouraged by those discussions. We're going to increase federal resources in order to ensure that this matter is resolved.
Today, the Auditor General released a damning report confirming that Liberal mismanagement led to at least $32 billion in inflationary spending. More costs, no control. Their lack of transparency contributed to the affordability crisis. The Auditor General is deeply concerned by the lack of controls, and her report shows Liberals are only going to keep their failed approach for current and future programs. Why are Canadians continuously on the hook for Liberal failures?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Speaker, it bears repeating that the Auditor General found that we achieved the goals we set out to do. We kept Canadians safe, we made sure Canadians were paid quickly, and we averted significant social and economic hardship for our country. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament approved an attestation-based approach. We knew when we committed, we were very transparent from the beginning, we would do post-payment verification. We're methodically going through that, and we'll continue to do so, working individually with Canadians to make sure a fair and equitable response to this.
For Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Well, if the Liberals' goals were to lack transparency, lack accountability, and lack control, the Auditor General confirmed that in her report today. Their legacy of mismanagement has made life more unaffordable, sending more Canadians to food banks than ever before. Record high food, rent, and mortgage costs are driven up by the Liberals' inflation. The more Liberals fail, the more Canadians have to pay. How many more Liberal failures are Canadians on the hook for?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Mr. Speaker, we took important action when we understood that the high cost of living was having an impact on Canadians. And in fact, yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Financial Post noted that our childcare policy has been a success. They said government policy has played a role in getting women back in the workforce, especially when it comes to childcare. Women feel confident going back into the workforce because they won't be spending their whole paycheck on childcare. Mr. Speaker, we are there for Canadians and we are delivering. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, the government will blame everyone else for their inflationary spending, but when the Auditor General confirms that a minimum of $32 billion in COVID overpayments and suspicious payments need more investigation, there is little argument that this mess added to inflation. The Auditor General has sounded the alarm bells on the lack of control on COVID spending. So lots of checks and no balances. And the government is continuing the same approach with current legislation, current programming. So I have one question. How can Canadians trust them?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I will get to the honourable member's question in a moment. I want to add my voice to those started by the Minister of Women and Gender Equality in this House today on the 33rd anniversary of École Polytechnique. I was a 19-year-old student at the U of A when word got to us about 14 women gunned down at École Polytechnique, and it became worse when we realized that this was motivated by hate and misogyny. We must do everything in this House to protect women and to end violence against women. And on the substantive question that the honourable colleague asked, millions of mothers who receive CERB benefits did not cause inflation, and neither did the benefits, neither did the businesses who took supports so they could keep their doors open.
A member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, we're not talking about those cases. Canadians deserve transparency about the $32 billion that the Auditor General says is just the tip of the iceberg of people who got money and it needs to be investigated. So Canadians deserve to know that there was no control when the money was going out, and now they learn that there's no control or accountability for taxpayers to get that money back. So when food bank use is at its highest rate and 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals, I'll ask again, how do Canadians trust them?
L'honorable ministre du Revenu.
Monsieur le Président, l'agence n'est
Mr. Speaker, the CRA does not agree with the Auditor General's calculation with regard to ineligible recipients to the wage subsidies. The CRA's calculations indicate that the people were highly compliant and that the Auditor General's figures were exaggerated. It's not her fault because we all know that she was pressed by the opposition to produce this report. Political games must not lead us to forget that the wage subsidy saved the economy and many people. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, according to a new report published yesterday, grocery costs are going to continue to rise in 2023. So annual spending for the average family is going to go up to $16,300, which is an enormous share of the family budget. Parents are already incapable of feeding their families, and now it's going to get worse. For Canadians, these price hikes are unaffordable. Can you believe it? In Canada, people can't afford to put food on their table or heat their homes. Will the Liberals pledge to stop their inflationary spending so that Canadians can afford to eat? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The difference between us and the Conservatives is that on this side of the House, we trust Canadians. We understand what Canadians need, and we're going to help them out either by giving them dental benefits or with daycare assistance. We trust Canadians, and we're going to be there to support them today and in future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. I can't believe that the member across the way gave us that kind of answer when we know that they're the ones who have lost control of public spending. The Auditor General confirmed that the government wasted $32 billion in payments to ineligible recipients. People don't have any money. They're charging their groceries, and Liberals are wasting billions of dollars. So once again, will the Liberals show some compassion and cancel their tax hikes? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, this is based on compassion and fiscal prudence. That's our response. If we look at the facts, millions of mothers who received CERB, they're not the ones who created inflation. Thousands of businesses who took wage subsidies, they're not the ones who created inflation either. Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives really want to help Canadians weather this difficult time, then they should do the right thing and vote for C-32, which is going to help Canadians. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, the Quebec Finance Minister will be tabling his economics update, but he'll have to make do with what he has because despite the fact that Quebec and the provinces have been calling for health transfers for years, the Liberal government refuses to increase them. They're simply abandoning us, Mr. Speaker. We see the crises in emergency rooms, a lack of manpower, and the care of our children is coming second. Why is the government saying no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Our healthcare system is confronted with major challenges, and it is key that we work together to improve healthcare for Canadians. We are disappointed by the statement by the provincial health ministers. However, our government remains ready to work together with the provinces and the territories to discuss more about priorities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, this government doesn't want to increase health transfers. It wants to impose standards. But which standards? How is Ottawa a better place to tell Quebec and the provinces how to do their work? Ottawa is Phoenix, Roxham Road, the passport crisis, delays in old age pensions, delays in EI, and immigration, where files go to die. So how does this government have the gall to tell provinces and Quebec how to do their work? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to my colleague, he knows that to say that we're not ready to increase health transfers is not true. We have been very clear. We're going to work with the provinces for that very purpose, to increase federal transfers to the provinces who have the responsibility and the jurisdiction to manage their healthcare systems. We recognize that. The only thing that we're asking for is to have transparent discussions with the provinces to ensure that we achieve the outcomes for patients and for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Transparent discussion, Mr. Speaker, those are standards, and we're going to repeat that once again. What the healthcare system needs is not standards. It needs Ottawa to do its share. Frankly, there is no one who thinks that the Quebec healthcare system has no standards. We're sick and tired of the federal government's haughty and pretentious attitude trying to tell us that they know best. What Ottawa needs for the healthcare system is funding, not condescension. So when will the federal government increase health transfers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for the question, but that is not true. For a long time, the government has been working with the provinces and territories, not just for healthcare funding, but to ensure a national vision of healthcare that meets the needs of Canadians. We will increase health transfers to 10% in 2023. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with the provinces and territories to improve healthcare in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Carleton Trail Eagle Creek.
In 2021, the government procured a system to track vaccines. This system, Vaccine Connect, is set to cost Canadians over $59 million. The government then decided to delay the development of key capabilities, forcing employees to use spreadsheets instead. This led to significant waste of vaccines and taxpayers' dollars, including confusion on expiration dates. Why did the government delay key developments on its own project, wasting vaccines and taxpayers' money?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Canada's COVID-19 procurement strategy was undertaken at a time of considerable uncertainty with the goal of protecting the health and safety of Canadians, and that is what we did, Mr. Speaker. While Canada's overall COVID-19 immunization strategy has been a success, with modelling suggesting that public health measures without vaccination could have seen over 16.5 million cases and nearly 500,000 deaths, improvements can and will be made to ensure continued success and future preparedness. But, Mr. Speaker, there was no waste. That is a false claim. And to suggest that we didn't act expediently, Mr. Speaker, is outside of the frame of...
For Carleton Trail Eagle Creek.
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps that member would like to have a conversation with the Auditor General. In her report this morning, she made it clear the government is on track for almost $2 billion in wasted vaccines by the end of this year. Over 15 million doses wasted so far, with the potential of the majority of another 55 million set to expire in 26 days. This government took vaccines meant for underdeveloped countries, the only G7 country to do so, while wasting billions in expired vaccines. When will this government stop its wasteful spending of taxpayers' dollars?
Good job. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Vaccines during a deadly pandemic was wasteful. Context matters, Mr. Speaker. And at the start of this pandemic, no one could predict which vaccine would be most effective, and with an increased global demand, our government prioritized protecting the health and safety of Canadians. Exactly. We will continue to work to keep securing the vaccines that Canadians need while taking measures to manage our supply and reduce wastage, Mr. Speaker. As recommended, we will also continue to work with provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners to enhance data sharing across jurisdictions and partners through a pan-Canadian health data strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General stated that the process this government relied on to distribute COVID benefits led to $4.6 billion in overpayments to ineligible individuals and at least another $27 billion that needs to be investigated. So how much of this $32 billion can taxpayers expect to recover, and how much money is this government going to spend in administrative costs to recover money for taxpayers?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
The Parliament approved an approach that was attestation-based and then rigorous post-payment verification. As a result of that approach, Mr. Speaker, Canadians were able to put food on their table. Canadians remained attached to their job. We positioned our economy well to come roaring back at the end of the pandemic. It has. 117% of the jobs have been recovered, and our public health outcomes are the envy of the world.
The honourable member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is the Auditor General said very clearly the post-payment verification process is anything but rigorous. The problem is taxpayers are now on the hook for these billions of dollars that they may never receive back. And this is the same failed process that the government is relying upon when distributing their new dental and rental benefits. So will the government admit that it had no controls and finally put some controls in place before they distribute any more government money?
The Honourable Minister.
That we are pursuing a very rigorous post-payment verification process based on best practice in the world of risk-based analysis. Mr. Speaker, we are taking a compassionate approach. We absolutely paused repayment during Omicron and other things that came up during the pandemic, but I can assure this House we are on top of it and we are following up.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Families are frustrated and anxious about the state of our emergency rooms. Sick kids are waiting in makeshift spaces for up to 20 hours, and this government is letting Premier Ford download healthcare costs onto municipalities. London City Hall, already overburdened, is being asked to pay $300 million to cover healthcare restructuring. This Liberal government is leaving families and the cities they live in to fend for themselves against a callous provincial government. When will this government hammer out a healthcare transfer deal to ensure cities don't have to bear the brunt of healthcare costs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from my colleague. We share the frustrations and concerns of parents across Ontario with the wait times at hospitals, particularly for kids. It's been a really challenging flu, RSV, and COVID season with all of those piling up, and we recognize it's been extraordinarily challenging for healthcare workers as well. But we believe on this side of the House that all you should need to get healthcare in Canada is your health card, not your credit card. So we'll always stand up for our public system. Canadians are proud of our system, and it's one based on need, not our ability to pay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, for decades, advocates have called to nationalize early learning and childcare, but we still don't have legislation in place that ensures long-term, protected funding for childcare that prioritizes the expansion of nonprofit and public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, families deserve access to high-quality, affordable childcare now. When will the Liberals introduce this important legislation? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question, and it's been a pleasure to work with her and so many colleagues in this House to deliver early learning and affordable childcare across this country. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have reduced fees by 50% from coast to coast to coast, which is meaning that more families are able to afford childcare, more women are entering into the workforce. In fact, women's workforce participation is at an all-time high in Canadian history, thanks to some of the policies, including childcare, that this government has put forward. And I'm looking forward to introducing legislation soon to make sure that we keep early learning and childcare a good for Canadians for all time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, today is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. 33 years ago today, I was a law student and remember very well the horrific shooting of 14 brilliant women at L'École Polytechnique in Montreal. Today is a day we vow to fight back against gun violence and gender-based violence. Can the minister speak about the importance of this day and our government's plan to address gender-based violence?
Minister for Women.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to the honourable member. The massacre at École Polytechnique was one of the most horrifying things to happen on Canadian soil. 14 women killed, 13 injured, simply because, Mr. Speaker, they were women. We will always stand up for victims and survivors of gender-based violence. We support them, We honor them. We condemn anyone who tries to sully their memory. And we will not rest until every Canadian, Mr. Speaker, is safe.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General is an incredibly critical part of our democracy. And so when an individual calls the Auditor General's integrity into question, which happened just now in this House, is an attack on our democracy. Simply, her only offense was not supporting and endorsing Liberal waste. Will the minister apologize?
L'honorable ministre du Revenu national.
Monsieur le Président, pendant que nos collègues d'en face parlent de gaspillage, parce qu'on a investi dans 13 programmes pour aider les Canadiens pendant la pandémie.
Apparemment, il y a un problème avec la traduction. Est-ce que vous...
Can you hear me in English? It's working? Okay.
Redonnez, écoutez-moi parce que...
Okay, we'll give the floor back to the minister, and you can hear me now. The interpretation is working. We'll ask the minister to answer the question, and we'll listen quietly. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I said that while our colleagues opposite were talking about waste in the 13 programs we implemented during the pandemic, on this side of the House, we can say that we saved lives. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not going to apologize for a government that saved lives. And what's worse, the opposition is willing to play petty politics at the expense of children. It's shameful.
For Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't the opposition that called out $32 billion in waste. That was the Auditor General. And my question again is a simple one. Will she retract her comments calling into question the independence of the Auditor General? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said a little earlier, the agency does not agree with the Auditor General's calculations when it comes to ineligible recipients for the CERB. The agency's checking reveals that the Auditor General's figures were exaggerated. It's not the Auditor General's fault. She was under a lot of pressure from the opposition, and these political games should not be tolerated. The CERB saved our economy. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Nowhere in the Auditor General's report did she question anything about having not enough time to produce her report. The report does not accuse the opposition of having pressured the Auditor General. To hide her own incompetence, the Minister of National Revenue today has questioned the integrity of the Auditor General of Canada in her report on pandemic spending. She should apologize. Will she, right now, yes or no? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue, of Heritage.
À l'ordre.
Order.
Laissez savoir quand vous êtes prêt.
Let me know when you're ready.
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We fully respect the Auditor General and what we wanted to say.
Pardon me, she absolutely agreed with us that we met the objectives of this plan. We kept Canadians safe, we put money in their pockets quickly, and we avoided significant economic and social harm.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament asked the Auditor General to investigate pandemic spending and how the government managed the pandemic. This Parliament asked for the Auditor General to shed light, not the opposition, this Parliament. And today in the House, the Minister of National Revenue, in order to cover up her own incompetence in managing the crisis, accused and questioned the Auditor General of Canada's integrity. Mr. Speaker, there's just one thing for the Minister to do: stand up and apologize in this House. The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for the Auditor General. It's the opposition who are questioning the Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, our government decided, and it was a crucial decision, to support businesses and workers through the pandemic. I'm sorry, it's hard to hear the answer. I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to start over. But before that, I would ask all members to calm down a little bit. Everyone's excited, we know that. But they should calm down a little bit and take a little bit of time, take a breath. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to say that the Auditor General, I have a lot of confidence in her, and she has all my respect. Our government took the crucial decision to support people and businesses through the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, 13 programs were put in place. We saved lives with those programs, Mr. Speaker, and I will never apologize for saving lives during the darkest times since World War II, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Let's change the topic. As COP15 kicks off in Montreal, the Prime Minister, who didn't feel the need to go to COP27, will be one of the few, if not the only, heads of state to put in an appearance. To say what? That biodiversity is a treasure threatened by human activity, and we have a responsibility to do more to protect the world's wildlife and flora and fauna. And then with a straight face, he'll wait for applause. If he wants to be taken seriously, why doesn't he announce an end to oil exploration off the coast of Newfoundland? The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that COP15 is taking place here in Canada. We need to protect nature and biodiversity around the world, and we've done a lot of things here at home. We've invested in protecting lands and waterways and the billion trees we promised to plant. It's very important to play a leadership role in the world in protecting nature, and Canada is there to do that. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Canada's oil is bad for the planet. It contributes to global warming and damages biodiversity. Both exploration and production adversely affect animal species like right whales or corals and plant species. This is hardly news, but Ottawa keeps acting like nothing's wrong. Biodiversity is beautiful. The planet is important. But what matters most to Canada is oil. Will the Prime Minister be honest enough to admit to COP15 participants that Canada is doing damage to biodiversity? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to protect nature and biodiversity, and Canada is a leader. But it's also important for my colleague to understand that we have an energy transition to oversee, and we need a prosperous economy for the future, and we have a plan to protect nature, to combat climate change, but also to have a strong and prosperous economy for the future.
Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, the government is attacking the Auditor General's independence in order to cover up their own incompetence. $30 billion, more than $30 billion, went to ineligible recipients, that is, people who did not meet the criteria of the programs. When the Auditor General called this out, the government's response is to criticize the work of a strong, independent professional who they, in fact, appointed. So will the Minister of Revenue apologize to the Auditor General and agree to accept all of her recommendations?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
welcome her report. But Mr. Speaker, let us actually take a look at some of the...
I want to remind the honourable members that the rules are you ask the question and then you wait. You don't keep asking the question over and over again. The honourable minister from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, let me state once again that we thank the Auditor General for her report, that we respect her work, but let's look at what her report said. The pandemic benefits prevented an increase in poverty that would almost have doubled without our investments, helped the economy bounce back from the effects of the pandemic. CERB allowed 8.9 million Canadians to be supported through the depths of the pandemic, and the wage subsidy kept 5 million people on the payroll. We've already recuperated $2.3 billion, Mr. Speaker. The system will continue to work, and we will continue to have the backs of Canadians.
The honourable member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General did take a look, and more than $30 billion in payments went to ineligible applicants. So we know in this House that the Auditor General is a respected officer of Parliament. Yes. It was this Parliament that asked for the report from the AG. The minister is now calling into question the independence of the AG. Will the minister apologize?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Speaker, we thank the Auditor General for her report. We worked closely with her to make sure she had all the data she needed to make her findings. And we are working hard on the post-payment verification to ensure that we work with individual Canadians. Over 150,000 Canadians have already worked out agreements with CRA for payment. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue methodically pursuing this work until it's done.
Good job.
The honourable member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that definitely was a non-answer. They say that they worked with the Auditor General, but they won't accept the recommendations from the Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Canada Revenue Canada, stand up and apologize for her remarks that seem to be that her government does not trust the Auditor General and the work that was done?
The Honourable Minister.
Our government trusts and respects the work of the Auditor General. And Mr. Speaker, let me just share with you.
Are we done? Very good. The Honourable Minister, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, let me repeat that our government respects and honours the work of the Auditor General and that we take a report. And let me share, Mr. Speaker, point 1023 from the report, and I quote, "We found that the COVID-19 programs achieved their objective to help Canada avoid a more severe contraction of the economy and the social consequences, for example, a significant increase in poverty. This financial support allowed the economy to rebound and return."
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Monsieur le Président, notre gouvernement reconnaît.
Mr. Speaker, last year, the number of internal allegations of serious wrongdoing in the federal government rose to 381. These numbers show that public servants know about the Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act and how to report their concerns. Can the minister explain what the government is doing to improve the legislation? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for his question and his hard work. We are seriously committed to promoting both of our official languages. On C-13, the Treasury Board will be playing a heightened monitoring role, and for the first time, that will include monitoring federal institutions to ensure that they respect their obligations to take positive steps, including cooperating with their provincial and territorial counterparts. C-13 must move forward in order to protect minority official language communities. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mary called me on the weekend. She's a senior on a fixed income, and her doctor is 230 kilometers away. She can't afford to fuel inflation. The Auditor General today revealed $32 billion in questionable spending, including $54 billion to build a $250,000 app. billions in wage subsidy to wealthy corporations, and issuing checks to prisoners and organized crime. Mr. Speaker, will the minister apologize for questioning the independence of the Auditor General?
Great question. The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize the challenges that seniors are facing, and our government has been there for them. Mr. Speaker, unlike the party opposite that has opposed every single measure that we put forward to support seniors, whether it was making sure doubling up the GST credit, which will help 11 million people, rental and dental support, Mr. Speaker, increasing the old age security by 10% for those 75 and over, Mr. Speaker, or the fact that we're increasing the guaranteed income supplement that has helped over 900,000 seniors, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to make sure we support seniors now and into the future. Thank you.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, what we've heard today from the Minister of National Revenue questioning the Auditor General's integrity, that's one thing. But the finding was that this is the worst mismanagement since World War II. Will the minister stand up and apologize on behalf of all the soldiers who died in World War II? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we thank the Auditor General for her report and we respect her work tremendously. But let's look at some of her findings. Our supports during the pandemic prevented an increase in poverty. 8.9 million Canadians were helped to get through the pandemic, and with the wage subsidy, thousands of Canadians were able to save their jobs. This is what we did on behalf of Canadians, and it was the right thing to do. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed by the Minister of National Revenue's lack of courage. The member for Gaspésie, I would invite her to apologize on behalf of all the soldiers. They were brave soldiers. Will the minister from the Gaspé show as much courage as those soldiers, stand up and apologize on their behalf? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to reassure my colleague that if there are people with courage out there, it is definitely people from the Gaspé and the Magdalen Islands. We have worked very hard to ensure that people who got COVID benefits were eligible, and we have a strategy of auditing and cost recovery. And this report simply confirms that our estimates were correct, Mr. Speaker.
Vancouver, Grenville.
Mr. Speaker, whether it's because of bad crops or extreme weather or Putin's illegal war in Ukraine or supply chain issues, food prices in Canada and around the world are on the rise. And Canadians are having a hard time putting food on the table, and they're looking to us. Can the Minister of Tourism and the Associate Minister of Finance tell the House what the government is doing to help Canadians with the cost of living?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my friend and honourable colleague for Vancouver Granville for his hard work on the file and his dedication to his residents. Mr. Speaker, we are always here to support Canadians, and the measures that we have in place put more money in the pockets of Canadians. And in the fall economic statement, Mr. Speaker, we propose to eliminate student loan interest, to make housing more affordable, and to increase the Canadian workers' benefit. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives can do the right thing and see their hearts grow not one, not two, but three sizes, and vote for C-32 and support Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Hundreds of thousands of people experience homelessness in Canada every year, and the Liberals' national housing strategy is failing them. The Auditor General says they won't meet their chronic homelessness target, and the CEO of CMHC confirmed that's the case. Meanwhile, people are dying on the streets. There is zero accountability from the Liberals and no clear plan to eliminate chronic homelessness. Canadians need action, not failed Liberal promises. What's the government's plan to eliminate chronic homelessness in Canada and ensure everyone has a place called home?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for her really important question. This is our plan.
doubling funding for Reaching Home from $2 billion to just under $4 billion, introducing the Rapid Housing Initiative that is on track to build 14,000 deeply affordable homes for the most vulnerable, including those experiencing homelessness, the introduction of the Canada Housing Benefit, which is helping vulnerable Canadians, renters across the country, deeply more affordable housing through the Canada the Co-Investment Fund, $2.9 billion to build 22,000 additional deeply affordable homes, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Courtney Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are dying and lives are being shattered every day because of a contaminated drug supply. Now, the Conservative leader wants to double down on the failed war on drugs. Well, this government won't fund the supports people need. The Liberals promised in the last election to send $500 million to the provinces and territories to improve access to evidence-based treatment. But yet again, they haven't followed through. When will this government move past the stigma and mount a health-based response to this national crisis?
Hear, hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health.
Mr. Speaker, the toxic drug and overdose crisis continues, as the member says, to take a tragic toll on the families, loved ones, and communities. Our government will use every tool at our disposal to work with our partners to end the national public health crisis. Since 2017, we've committed more than $800 million to address the overdose crisis, and we are taking concrete steps to divert people who use drugs away from the criminal justice system. Approving BC's decriminalization proposal for personal possession of certain substances was an important step. We know that we have to do more, and we will.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. C'est tout le temps que nous avons. L'honorable député de Mirabel is...
The honourable member for Mirabel on a point of order. Mr. Speaker,